I would like this to be as interactive and as practical as it can be. If I start talking shop and you don't interrupt me, I'll continue to talk shop. And so you may have to go, hey, slow your roll, and we'd like you to address this or that or the other. I started in youth ministry in the spring of 1980, and I'll just let that marinate a little bit. And so I've gone through lots of phases in ministry. I've been the single college-age guy with no family. I've been a young married guy. I've been a guy with a toddler. I've been a guy with a teenager. Worked primarily for two churches, Memorial Parkway Church of Christ. I started in the spring of 80 as a junior in high school and worked with a church in Anniston, then went to Harding and worked with some little churches while I was a student. But when we left Harding, I preached for about a year and a half in Salem, Arkansas. In 1986, we moved to Huntsville. And I worked with Memorial Parkway in Huntsville until I went into private practice. And then when I went into private practice, I told the guys at Parkway, I said, I'll still do your youth ministry. I'll do it for free until my daughter graduates high school, and then we can renegotiate. I understand if that's non-traditional and you need to hire a guy to sit in your office. I said, but I'm going to be paying the bills out of a counseling practice, and you guys don't have to worry about it. And they said, we really think we need to hire a guy. And it was no harm, no foul. I mean, you know, I knew that I told them in July that I was going to do this, make this move in January. And so they decided they wanted to hire a young man to be their full-time youth minister. Long-term friend of mine, Tim Orbison, said, hey, over here at Maysville, we'll take some of that action. So I just went over to Maysville and was running my private practice and doing their youth ministry as a family or a parent-based ministry. And I did that with them for about 14 years. And then just recently, some friends of mine attend a church at the Meridianville congregation, and we were doing some stuff with our youth group at Maysville that we called intergenerational ministry. So the first Sunday night of every month, every kiddo in the building met for a devotional after church. And so you'd have the senior high kids and the curtain climbers and the crumb crunchers in the same room together. And it started kind of this weird thing that the little kids would sit in the laps of the big kids and we'd sing VBS songs with them. But then the older kids would sing these beautiful songs that they sang, and the little kids would learn them. And then the next week we'd come to church, and instead of having the little kids and the middle kids, all our kids were just kids. You know, you see the four guys who won the state basketball championship playing dodgeball with the little bitty guys. And it was just kind of this real eclectic thing. And then we decided we'd get the adults involved. So the fifth Sunday of every month, we would have a devotional with the young people and the adults. And we set out round tables, and you couldn't sit at a table with anybody within a certain age range of yourself. And so the youngest person at the table and the oldest person at the table could pick a song. Or we'd have the kids interview the oldest people at the table and introduce them to the room. And we kind of started this thing where we wanted our church, instead of a youth group and an adult group and a seniors group, we wanted those circles to overlap. And so these guys at Meridianville said, hey, we like some of the stuff that you're kind of doing by natural selection. Would you come to Meridianville and help us develop that? And so technically I'm the intergenerational minister at Meridianville. I don't really know what that means. It means I'm too old to work with the kids and too young to work with the senior citizens is what it means. But that's currently what I'm doing in a ministry role. But when I went into private practice, I had been doing youth ministry for a long, long time. And when I went into private practice, I thought, if you don't actually have the title, they may kick you out of the club. And I may not teach in another workshop. They may not ask me to speak on the lecture series anymore. And I said, I'd like to put some things on paper that talks about philosophy of youth ministry. And so I based a lot of my thoughts on working with kids from an author named Stephen Glenn. Stephen Glenn wrote a book called Raising Self-Reliant Children in a Self-Indulgent World. Now, Glenn's a pagan. He's not a believer. He's a nice guy, I think. But he wrote this thing. It's very formative, very instructive for what I thought I needed to do with kids. And so I wrote Dr. Glenn and said, I'm putting together this little series of essays, and I want to talk about raising spiritually self-reliant kids. And can I use your research? Can I use some of your studies and kind of massage that a little bit and use it with your permission? He's super, super gracious. Said, yeah, I would be glad for you to use that. Just make sure you tell folks you got the original idea. So I basically took this concept of what is our goal in ministry? What is our goal in parenting, and how should we, when kids finish our program at church, what do we want? And so we want to raise spiritually self-reliant young people. Now, Stephen Glenn says in order to have a self-reliant person, there must be 3 perceptions and there must be 4 skills. He calls them the significant 7. I watch old Western movies, I'd have called them the magnificent 7. Walk, 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 but I didn't get to name them, all right? So here's the 3 perceptions. A student must believe, number 1, I am capable. There's stuff I can do, and I'm good at it. Self-esteem comes from confidence. Confidence comes from competence. So we let them try, we let them fail better, and eventually we instruct them, okay? So kids must believe I am capable. Number 2, young people must have a belief that I'm significant. God doesn't make junk. I'm created in the image of God. The blood of Christ was shed on my behalf. I have significance in the world. That doesn't mean everybody gets a trophy, but it means you have some inherent significance. Love your neighbor as yourself is inherent to the Christian ethic. If I don't have a proper view of me, I cannot have proper interaction with you. If I view myself too highly, I'm a narcissist. If I view myself too lowly, I'm codependent or a co-addiction or something like that. So I'm capable, I'm significant, and then the 3rd perception is my choices affect my outcomes. I can influence what happens to me. I can make choices that affect my happiness, my success, whatever. Then the 4 skill levels. Skill number 1 is intrapersonal. I-N-T-R-A, intrapersonal. And that's basically coming to peace and understanding who I am. Understand my own emotions. Understand how I function. Then there's interpersonal skills, I-N-T-E-R. And that's when the me that me runs into the you that you. And realizing, hey, we're different. And learning to talk about other people's perspective, other people's perceptions, recognize other people's emotions. 3rd skill level is systemic skills. There's the me that's me, there's the you that's you, and there's a whole lot more you than there is of me. So I can't always be first. I won't always be the leader. I won't always be popular. My artwork doesn't always end up on the refrigerator. Everybody doesn't get a trophy. And then there's judgmental skills. Can I make decisions based on appropriate values? Not rules, but values. And so that's Stephen Glenn's stuff. Now, I read that way back. I was skinny and had hair, and it was a long, long time ago. Then I ran into this thing, the theory of emotional intelligence. The predictor of success on the planet is not your SAT score, is not your ACT score, and please refrain from throwing things. It has nothing to do with your GPA. Emotional intelligence is the predictor for success on the planet. Now, here's how we define emotional intelligence. Being able to understand my own personal emotions. And sometimes we don't. Teenagers typically will manifest anger when they're actually afraid. Little girls with eating disorders can't tell you that they're sad, mad, disappointed, scared, angry, or hungry. And so everything is hungry. And so they don't no self-insight. Now, once I understand my emotions and can label them, hey, I'm scared, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm jealous, whatever, I respond to my emotions with self-regulation. And self-regulation has basically 3 components. Self-regulation is, number 1, delayed gratification. I don't get to have it now. I have to wait on some things. I have to put in some time to get everything that I want. Number 2 is impulse control. Just because you feel angry doesn't mean you punch a wall. Teaching our children that your emotions are not instruction. Your emotions are information. The difference in information and instruction, Jackie and I are driving down the road. We stop at a convenience store. I say, I'm going to go into the men's room. I leave. 45 minutes later, I come back to the car. She says, what took you so long? I said, well, there's a sign in there that says clean restrooms. And I had to find a bucket and a mop and some hot water and some rubber gloves. That's the same thing Jackie would say. The sign doesn't tell you to do anything. It tells you something. Your emotions are information. They tell you something. They don't tell you to do anything. Occasionally, they lead to a request for action, but they're never a command. Does that make sense? So I respond to my emotions with delayed gratification and impulse control, and then motivation. And motivation is the idea of discipline, so I will invest the hard work into doing things that are necessary. We talked last night about what you want now versus what you want most. And you invest into the what you want most rather than the what you want now. The other side of emotional intelligence, and by the way, read Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, if you want to talk about motivation and why kids quit and why kids don't do things and why kids don't pursue long-term goals. And just as an observation, you look at the soft society that we're raising, 30% dropout rate in the last 5 years at the police academy. Got guys who went through a year-long process to be selected and they drop out on day one because of the PT. I passed the SWAT team PT test at 49, okay? And these kids are failing the academy PT test. I want to do this. Had a guy walk out on Red Man Day where you wear the red pads and you just have to fight a little bit. I'm just not wired that way. Read Angela Duckworth's book on grit. But learning the motivation to achieve what we call long-term goals or things that require deep satisfaction. I'll give you an example of deep satisfaction. We can take every Friday night this year and go to a movie for 2 hours. Or we can take every Friday night this year and study 2 hours on our master's degree. At the end of the year, if we've gone to the movie every Friday night, what have we done? Seen 52 movies. Or we have a master's degree. I can decide to be player and have 52 first dates. Or I can kiss somebody goodnight that I've been married to 52 years. One of those requires some hard work. One of those doesn't. That's what you talk about motivation for deep satisfaction. Does that make sense? So once I get that handled on my end, the other side of emotional intelligence is, can I recognize those emotions in you, and can I respond to them appropriately with empathy, listening, negotiation, and sharing? Now, in my mind, everything emotional intelligence describes is exactly what Glenn describes: intrapersonal, interpersonal, systemic, and judgmental skills. I'm capable, I'm significant, and I can influence my outcome. I see those things, if they're not related, they're kissing cousins. Okay? It's also what Jesus said. As you would therefore that men should do to you, do ye also unto them. Jesus did emotional intelligence in 2 sentences. This other guy wrote a book. It took me 6 hours to listen to driving. All right? So when we start talking about, okay, what are we going to do for the development of our young people? We want young people to have, if you can say it, be spiritually, emotionally intelligent. How do I respond to me? How do I respond to God? How do I respond to my connection to God causing me to deal with other people? When I asked Jesus to sum up everything that had to do with godliness, what did he say? Love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if we're not modeling that for our young people, we're not doing that, then I think we're missing the boat on what church is about and what youth group is about. Number 2, youth ministry is a supplement for parenting, not a substitute for parenting. Okay? And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and favor with man. Right? Physically, socially, spiritually, and intellectually. Wisdom and stature, favor with God. You know when that happened? After he left temple. See, prior to that verse, he's sitting in the temple. He's talking to the doctors and the lawyers, and he's asking them questions, and he's answering them questions. But he grows in wisdom and stature and favor with God, favor with man, when he goes home with an obscure Jewish carpenter and, for all practical purposes, a 27-year-old Jewish girl. God, for whatever reason, said, you guys are the experts on child rearing, because they go home with you at night. Okay? And so that's the deal. And so as parents, you're involved in youth ministry. And if you're not involved in youth ministry as a parent, then you're missing the boat and you're cheating some things from your kids. In the book Sticky Faith, a long-term study of young people in Protestant religions retaining their dedication to their religion. And I'll have to be honest, I picked it up because it said Sticky Faith. I thought it was about Spider-Man becoming a Christian. Spider-Man is not in the book at all, okay? Very disappointed with that. But Sticky Faith says your child must have 5 mature spiritual people in their lives to reach spiritual maturity and to maintain their faith. That is 1 child and 5 adults. That's not 1 child and 75 youth people. We don't want our kids learning to drive from other kids. We don't want our kids learning about sex from other kids. Why in the world did we ever think it was a good model to isolate our kids with only kids to teach them spiritual development? Or isolate our kids with only kids and some cool dude from college? Now, I've been the young, energetic youth guy. I always thought it was interesting that Paul tells Timothy, let no man despise your youth, but be an example of the believers in word and spirit and faith and conversation and charity and purity. When I talk to these young youth ministers who are coming right out of college and going to work with a group of people, I said, you do realize you're not even qualified to be a deacon, much less an elder. And this eldership says we're going to let you spend an inordinate amount of time with our young people. You better have your act together. Don't let anybody in that congregation look at you and despise you because you're a rookie. In word and spirit and conversation and faith and charity and purity. And if you're not willing to man up and be mature on that level, being cool is not going to get it as a youth minister. You've got to be spiritually mature to be a youth minister. If you can't pull that off, do something else. Okay? Because it's the most vulnerable population of our congregation, and the least qualified people are getting to work with them. So if we're not working with our youth ministers, then, when you hire a youth minister, ask, what are we hiring this guy to do? And it's okay to say, we're going to hire a guy, we don't have the energy to do some of the stuff he does. It's okay to say, we're going to hire this guy to do stuff that he's not smart enough not to do, like a lock-in. I'm cool with that, Lock-ins are fun. Yeah, whatever, kid, And I can lock myself in the truck and sleep, but there are guys that'll do that. But ask yourself why, and if you don't know why you're hiring him, don't hire him. What I tell the young men, I said, they're hiring you, and the most frequent activity you'll have at your congregation is 52 Sundays and 52 Wednesdays you'll teach a Bible class. And if you're not a swordsman, don't take that job. And nothing else happens in your week till you're prepared to teach class. Nothing else happens until you're prepared to present that lesson. Because when you leave and they leave your program, if they're not competent in the Word of God, they're not competent spiritually. And you don't want young people running around saying, this is what Lonnie says, this is what Steve says, this is what Bob says. You want young people running around saying, this is what God says. Well, how do you know God says it? Because I can find it myself. Read Hebrews 5 and 6 when it talks about the apostasy. You'll find out that the apostasy described in Hebrews 6 is linked to people unable to use their Word of God and go past the basic principles of truth. He starts out, hey, we could talk to you a lot about this, but it's difficult because by this time you ought to be teachers, but you need milk and not solid food. And solid food belongs to those people who are mature age, who've exercised their senses to discern between right and wrong. And we need to leave the elementary principles and move on to maturity, because it's impossible for those who've been enlightened, if they fall away, to renew them again. That apostasy warning is not about people compromising on homosexuality or transgenderism. That apostasy warning is people can't use their Bibles. And so our youth group has to be Bible-oriented, led by mature spiritual people, and you've got to have mature spiritual people involved with our kids in their function. I think this is great. We've got how many kids here, and look at the number of adults here. That's a good thing. I've spoken at some youth rallies, and there have been no adults. You get your bus driver, or you have a youth event, and we spend so much time doing the Mary Martha thing in the kitchen, we don't come out and sing for the Devo. You're there to take care of spiritual interaction with the kids. And if you can't spend the time not preparing food, we'll order pizza. Take that off. I tell my adults, you work with my kids, you're not in the kitchen. We'll stay here till midnight and clean up. We're not going to clean up while the kids are here. We're going to interact with the kids. All right, so that's kind of my spiel to introduce this thing. Did that generate any questions or any topics? All right, let's look at the model I use for youth ministry. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. And they moved it in my, there it is, okay. The scripture elves will move that stuff for you. Now, this is a non-traditional parenting passage. This is not one of those things we typically go to from the Proverbs or Ephesians. But this is kind of a sideways observation that Paul made, and when he made it and I read it, it was like, what? 1 Thessalonians 2:10, you are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly, justly, and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe. And as you know, we encouraged, we comforted, and we urged every one of you, as a father does his own children, that you walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. That's my model for youth ministry. The function of the church when we interact with each, and by the way, that's my model for men's ministry. That's my model for deaconing. That's my model for ladies' ministry. We encourage, we comfort, and we urge one another. Period. And if you're involved in a congregation and you're exposed to young people, we need to be doing those three functions in their lives: encourage, comfort, and urge. Encourage basically means the idea of calling people to ask them to participate in things that are outside their comfort zone. It's getting them to do things they don't feel qualified to do. It's letting them learn that they are capable. Oh, Steve and Glenn, I am capable. They're capable of doing something for the church. Not what does the church do for you, what do you do for the church? And it can be anything. In fact, if you look at the old church growth study where it says we lose 75% of our kids between ages 13 and 23, they revisited that and said 80% of the 75% that walk away come back in their late 20s if they have one thing in common, that they did something for the church as frequently as one time a month. It didn't have to be leading, singing, or passing out communion trays. It could be putting cards in the back of the pew or cutting the grass. But they make an investment into the local work. I'm capable. And so we need to be having our young people do things for themselves. Hey, we're going to have a youth rally. Let's decorate our building. We've just got home from a bus trip. Let's clean our van. You used it, you clean it. And then they have some buy-in. They have some investment. The little church at Maysville, which is out in Gurley, Alabama, for a long, long time, they did not have a contract with anybody to clean their building or cut their grass. They said, we'll take the money we use cleaning our building, we'll take the money we use paying somebody to cut our lawn, and we'll send another missionary into the field. Now, in order to make sure this missionary gets his money and our building is clean, we need people to clean our buildings. So care group team number 1 cleans it this month. Care group team number 2 cleans it next month. Young people clean it on the 3rd month. And so on any given Wednesday night, you see young people in here, with pledge polishing the pews or Windex in the windows or running a vacuum. You walk by and say, hey, appreciate what you're doing to help that missionary. And those young people had buy-in. They learned that, leadership in the church is not up front, out loud, wearing a tie with a title. Read Romans 12 when he talks about leadership. He'll talk about prophecy, he'll talk about teaching, but he'll talk about leading and encouraging and giving and showing mercy. Leadership in the church involves people skills. It doesn't have to be a deacon ministry. So, number 1, we encourage our young people. Number 2, we comfort. When I do this as a 4-day seminar, we spend a day on crisis intervention with kids. Your young people are going to go into crisis, and we're going to have to learn how to respond. And we respond to them with emotional intelligence. John Gottman talks about emotion coaching. A lot of times we are emotion dismissing. Oh, you don't really feel that. Or we're emotion disapproving. You can't feel that way and be a Christian. No, the emotions you have came from God. You're allowed to feel them. When you use them properly, they produce balance and harmony. When they produce destruction, dysfunction, or distress, something's going wrong with your emotions. But they really come from God, and they're supposed to be used healthily. And so we respond to our kids in crisis. And it's very interesting that if you understand the concept of attunement or alignment, responding to a kid in crisis is not solving the problem. It's letting the child be heard. The difference in this person and this person looking at each other and going, I'm scared. You don't need to be afraid. I'm scared. It's not really, versus standing beside each other and, oh, I see that thing you're afraid of. And I get that you're afraid of it. I don't have to demonstrate I'm not afraid of it. It's called attunement. When my wife has a master's degree in kinesiology. She's a biology teacher. She teaches everything from cell structure all the way up to animals. She's a very sharp lady. When she sees a mouse, guess where that master's degree goes? It's suddenly a rat. Jonesy, there's a rat. Rat, mouse. Mouse, rat. Okay? Shoot it. Maybe the hardwood. You know, I mean, she's ready for the mouse to be gone. But instead of me debating with her, I play hockey with the mouse and he's gone. Now, after she calms down, I can say, let's talk about the rat. How big was he? Well, he was like that. And what color was he? Was he black or gray? Oh, he was gray. So was he a field mouse or a woods mouse? He's probably just a house mouse. Okay. Was he carrying body parts away? No. What was he doing? Well, he was scurrying around because he looked lost. Oh, so he was as confused as you were. Having that discussion with her while he's there does not work. After the mouse, but I align with her and say, I get the fact that you're afraid of mice. I think their tails remind her of snakes, which is another total different story. We just handle the mouse. When your kids go into crisis, they don't need to be talked to. They need to be listened to. A hostage negotiator named Mark Goldston wrote a book called Just Listen. And he does this really, really cool technique. His technique is, I bet you think nobody else gets the fact that I bet you think nobody else understands how scared you are, how frustrated you are, how angry you are, whatever. When you use the proper word, you will see a body language change and a countenance change on somebody. You have a kid sitting in your office slumped down, and you go, I bet you think nobody understands how frustrated you are with your dad. You're right. He's unreal. And you listen, and he may talk for 30 minutes about why he's frustrated with dad. It's not the time for you to talk. It's your time to listen. And after he tells you everything he's going to tell you, then he's taken his emotions and he's bled them off, and your intellect comes back online, and then you go, if I felt that way, I'd be frustrated too. And now, instead of us arguing with each other about how he feels or doesn't feel or should or shouldn't feel, we're aligned. We're standing beside each other, looking at the same danger, looking at the same future, looking at the same dreams. And now we can talk. Because he'll go from resisting to listening to considering to doing. When you do crisis intervention with your kids, that's all they need. They need to be heard. Your 7th grade daughter is at school, and she and a boy begin to go together. But they can't go anywhere. So they're technically not going. Okay? So her and this boy are now not going together, but they're going. And she comes home and announces, Dad, this boy and I, who weren't going together, but going together, are no longer officially going nowhere together. And her heart's broken. So what do you tell her? Well, statistically, you'll be in 8 major relationships. 60% of you will be engaged one time before you're married. That doesn't help that little girl, does it? Put her in your lap, you say, tell me who he is, and we'll never look for his body. Oh, no, wait, that's... I'm sorry. Bad dad. You say, tell me, are you hurt? Are you scared? Are you disappointed? Do you feel used? Does him breaking up with you say something about you or something about him? Broccoli doesn't have its feelings hurt because I don't like it. I just like chocolate better. This does say nothing about your worth. As a person says everything to do about his taste buds. And that's good, bad, or indifferent, but that's not your problem anymore. But once she feels felt, she'll talk to you. And if we're always solving their problems and telling them what they should feel and how they should feel and what they ought to do, they quit talking to us. They won't be heard, they won't be listened to. And every now and then you get that, hey, what happened? What does this mean to you? And then you have to gently ask, does this mean what you think it means? Because kids do emotional dysregulation, especially your adolescents. They take the concept of ideal, if that wall is ideal and this wall is unacceptable, and they narrow it about like that. And if it's not ideal, it's unacceptable. If you didn't let me go there, you've never let me go anywhere. If I can't do that well, I can't do it at all. If I'm not the best, I'm the worst. He's not my boyfriend, I'll never have a boyfriend again, you know. And we got to get them to spread that. But right now, that's what they do because of the way their brains work. Their thinking brain and their feeling brain are talking to each other for the first time in their lives. And they can think and upset themselves, which is really cool, you know. And they'll give you these messages like this. Dad, did you hear about Haiti? They got hit with a hurricane. It needs to be cleaned up. Have you looked at your room? You know, let's save 3,000-mile trip and let's just go in there and do a little world relief. You're trying to prove the theory of evolution in your sink. There's life forming in there. Totally off her radar. But Haiti, buddy, that's a big deal. And so they emotionally dysregulate. You got to learn. There's squirrels at that age. They'll grow out of it. But you just got to deal with it. But if they don't feel listened to, they will stop talking to you. So you encourage, you comfort, and then you urge. And urging is when we spend the day talking about discipline and talking about how to set limits and how to deal with consequences. By the way, I'm capable and I'm significant in courage and comfort. Discipline, I can influence what happens to me. One of the coolest discussions I have with young people is, how many times have you rebelled and it ever got you more freedom? They've never been asked to consider that. Had a little guy's mom snatched him, and I typically don't like to do you bring him to the counselor fixes you. He's not broken, he's being a kid, okay? But this single mom brings this kid in. He skipped curfew by 10 minutes, snuck out behind the apartments and smoked a miniature cigar. So he's sitting in my big kid, 15-year-old, you know. I said, so what's going on here? Oh, man, my moms just don't get it. I'm 15 years old. I'm grown. If I want to step out behind this building and smoke for 10 minutes, why do I have to be in the house at 10 o'clock? I said, so you broke curfew and asserted your manliness and smoked a blackie. Yeah. How long are you grounded for? 6 weeks? I said, let me get this straight now. You traded 6 weekends for 10 minutes. Would you make change for a 20? Because you're not very smart at math. He's like, he never in his life considered the trade he was making. That's the only conversation we had. I've got a note in my desk from his mom says, I cannot believe the effect you had on my child. I said, I told your child he was an idiot is all I did. And he can't make good trades. That's all the conversation I had with a young man, but he never had anybody ask him, how many times have you rebelled and got more freedom? None. When you obey, you get more stuff. And so when we discipline our children, it can't be personal. It has to be logical. It has to have good, read Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12 talks about, he's right in that middle section where he's asking these people not to give up. And he says, you must consider suffering in the same way you do discipline. And he makes these assumptions that our human fathers disciplined us, and God lets us suffer consequences for the same reasons that we experience discipline. Now, God doesn't reach down from heaven and thump us, but God says, look, if you do something I've asked you not to do, it will turn out bad, and I'll let you ride that roller coaster. But it's not because God doesn't love us, because discipline is promoted by love. It builds respect for God, because once God says, don't do this, and I do it, and it turns out bad, I go, hey, God knows what he's talking about. By the way, faith is living like you believe that God knows what he's talking about. That's a great little poster I read somewhere. And then the byproduct of discipline is that it improves the child, it increases their holiness, and it yields a peaceable fruit of righteousness by those who've been trained by it. And discipline is about training. Okay? And so that's kind of the model I use for youth ministry. When we interact with adults in the congregation, we interact with kids in the congregation, as men, we need to be encouraging, comforting, and urging each other. And we work with kids, we need to be encouraging, comforting, and urging them as well. I'll take a break and see if that generated any questions or comments, or was I unclear? Yes, sir. Okay, typically the old statistic was we lose 75% of them between the ages of 13 and 23. But if you do a follow-up look, If 75 kids dropped out of this youth program, in their later 20s, 80% of those 75 come back to the body. Now, what's 80% of 75? It's a pretty good number. But that 80% that returns to the body returns if they have been involved with the body on a contributing level rather than a consuming level, at least as frequently as once a month. So it's not that they came to class. It's not that they came to worship. It's not that they went to retreat. It's not that they went to camp. But did they do something for the church? Something as simple as put cards in the pews, help Dad deliver fruit baskets, go with the deacons to clean up somebody's yard. We give them, I'm capable and I'm significant. You're a part of the church while you're a kid, not waiting to be the future of the church. And that's a very interesting study. I think that's in George Barna's stuff, or maybe the Flavel Yakeley study. It's been a long time since I looked at those two things. Did that answer your question? Well, there's 3 factors in a Barna study. It says what happens at home, what happens at church, and how influenced they are by popular culture. So you've got 2 of these things that we can control. We can absolutely dictate the atmosphere of the church. We can absolutely dictate the atmosphere at home. And by the way, the dynamic of what happens at home is not mom to son or dad to daughter, but it's how mom and dad treat each other. When you look at these studies. And so children do not tolerate a mixed message very well. In the Thessalonian passage, he says, we were devout, just, and blameless. Paul says, listen, when we interacted with you, we had our act together. We were consistent. We're not perfect, but we were consistent. I can sit down with a teenager and ask this question. Do your parents profess things in public that they do not practice in private? And if he answers me in the affirmative, I can predict with 95% success you're going to have a spiritually at-risk kid. So we intentionally, what do we do at church? Intentional, are we consistent at home? And then the third thing is, how influenced are they by popular culture? Every now and then you get a sheep who wants to be a coyote. And there's not much you can do about that. They've decided Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. And so every now and then you just have that outlying child that says, this is cool, this is what I'm going to buy into, I'm not going to pursue, I'm not going to set my mind on things above. And there's really, that's not an at-fault thing from a parent, that's not an at-fault thing from the congregation. Be very careful how you measure spiritual maturity among your kids. As we've demonstrated with the rich young ruler, they can look really good on paper. You know, I quit a long time ago as a youth minister trying to figure out the ones who got it. My phone rings. I've been in this a long, long time. You know, my phone rings. Hey, Mr. Lonnie, I just wanted you to know the elders at my church have made me the deacon in charge of the singles. I'm sorry? You're a deacon? Yeah, I'm going to give a Devo lesson. Would you come and listen to it? You're going to preach it. You never brought your Bible to class. I don't think you were conscious for 90% of it. Oh, no, you were an influence in my life, and you can't measure that. A kid can sit on his cell phone and multitask and hear every word you've said. And if you try to lose your mind about put that phone down and do it, kids can do things with their brains your brain can't do. The adults in this room have 300 billion dendrites in your brain, neurological pathways. Those teenagers across the hall have 3 times that many. Their brains can process and remember things. Our brains ain't got a chance. There's no significant rock music being written by anybody over the age of 26. I'm just telling you, those guys are creative. You know, look at the people who are designing computer software. Look at the people who are making the world happen. That's because their little brains, they can do that. So I see a kid, you know, sitting in an assembly and he's on his phone. You don't know what he's getting and what he's not getting. And I quit trying to measure spirituality based on, does he have the look? I quit trying to measure spirituality based on how active they were. appearances at your building doesn't necessarily say they're getting it or not getting it. Here's a kid who leads devos and will lead singing and lead a prayer and give a talk. I had 3 guys at my congregation I called the Blood Guard, and that doesn't mean anything to you if you haven't read Stephen R. Donaldson's fantasy books. But these guys never gave a devo, never gave a talk, never led a song. But if you put a list up to clean the toilets or go to Six Flags, I'd have 3 slots on that place for the Blood Guard, because those guys show up for everything. 2 of those 3 guys now are deacons. One's a minister. The other guy's a Marine. I guess he's saving the world for Jesus in his own way. But he's an interesting young man. But those guys would come to, and you'd never find them on the radar. But Jacobs and Watson and Smallwood, everything we did as a church. It didn't matter. They were going to just be there. And you couldn't measure that, oh, he spoke at Lads to Leaders or he gave this. Now, I think we need to teach those skills to those kids. But performing task does not equal spirituality. Okay? In fact, sometimes teaching them that this is righteousness gets them out of balance a little bit. Especially if we're writing their lessons for them so they sound good. The function of a child delivering a talk is he does the study to deliver the talk. And a 5th grade kid will deliver a 5th grade level talk. Deal with it. But if you teach him that delivering a talk is being polished and looking good, you've taught him duplicity. You've taught him that the outward is better than the inward. Be very, very careful. Now, I think they had to have the skills, but, performing a task doesn't equal spirituality. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir. There's several guys that approach this differently. I always like to do a both and rather than an either or. Hey, we're going to go spend 4 hours doing this, and then we're going to go do this. Or I say, hey, here's a big trip, and in order to qualify for this, I need to see your face at this, this, and this. We're going to have, maybe every other month we do a service project, so that's 6 a year. If you're at 3 a year, I'll count that. And then, a lot of times we don't understand that some kids just don't like to get out of their comfort zone. And I think a balance of, hey, here's one of our retreats every year was an in-depth study retreat. And one of our retreats every year was just a hangout. We're going to have a class in the morning, a devo at night, but the rest of the day, let the kids just build relationships. Boys build relationships by doing. Girls build relationships by talking. Boys are on teams in order to compete. Girls compete in order to be on teams. There's no crying in baseball, okay? I mean, it's a total different animal. You have a controversial call with a bunch of boys, and what do you hear? Forget it, let's play. But the little girls have to have everybody's feelings okay, or they can't play. And so, learning that with the girls and with the guys is guys will build bonds by doing, girls build bonds by talking. I've had several young teenage girls say, my favorite thing in our youth group was when we would drive across country and we could sit at the front and talk with you. Driving a van is not an activity. But they had personal access time to me, sitting in the front 2 rows of the van. We just talk. Now, the boys remember, inventing German handball and playing Ninja Death Killer Frisbee and that kind of stuff. But the girls remember the time we sat around talking, driving in a van in the wee hours of the morning. So you say, okay, we're going to do this and then do this, or we need to do 3 of these before we do 1 of these. And then don't lose your mind about it. If I have access to a kid, I have access to a kid. If they're not around me, I can't influence them. So I don't care what they come to, as long as they come to something. And I know we like to kind of have these objective measures of maturity that, this kid will get his hands dirty. And I had girls that would come to things and not do anything. Little girl named Rhonda Rosenblum, daughter of our, he was Rhonda Hall, now she's Rhonda Rosenblum. She'd come to stuff, and you start doing something, she'd sit in the corner and observe. Well, I never made her do anything. I let her feel welcome to sit. Her 2 daughters go and do everything and participate. And I said, why are your kids so active? She said, well, I had such a great time in the youth program. You had the personality of a candy bar in our youth program. But I didn't make her feel uncomfortable. She got to do it her way, and it was cool, and you know, loved her. A cop killed himself, and I got called in on the thing, first to look for him while he was doing it. We'll end up at this cop's house to see his children. Well, I took them outside and was shooting basketball, and I was dressed for church. Rhonda lives across the street. She goes, Lonnie, my kid saw you out there shooting ball with those kids. Says, he's too old to be out there shooting the ball with those kids. They're worried about my safety. And she says, no, that's just who Lonnie is. And she had those memories that I would interact with the kids, although she was not one of the kids that actually interacted. But in her mind, her memory of our youth group experience, and you know, now I'd take 100 just like Rhonda, because she was a solid component of our youth group. She wasn't active the way I would define active, but in her mind, it worked for her, and I was cool with that. So quit trying to measure them objectively. They're around you because they want to be around you. Kids vote with their feet. And if they don't enjoy the play stuff or the fellowship stuff or the surf, they won't come. And when they're there, celebrate. I always worry about the kids who are there, not the kids who aren't. If 50 kids show up, we eat at McDonald's. If 4 kids show up, we eat at Cracker Barrel. Ta-da! You know, that's what we did. Stephen, are we done?